Putin has cancer. Insider information from the Kremlin reveals the Kremlin dictator's fatal diagnosis. A secret video has been leaked. The dictator has only a few months left to live. A historic collapse. Division within Russia. Putin's approval rating has dropped to a minimum, and Russians want peace. But that's not all. The master of the Federation fears betrayal and a coup, worried that his own people will finish him off, the result of a massive purge. The noose around Shoigu has tightened. Generals are getting 13 years each from Rogach. The axis of evil is destroying itself. On top of that, Russia is in complete isolation. All former allies have been defeated. Khamenei has been eliminated. Maduro was captured in 3 hours. Assad has completely surrendered Syria, and Comrade Xi has been attacked. Who will be next? You'll find out all the answers and details right now. Greetings, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Andrei Silikov. Let's talk about the absolute collapse of Putin's empire happening right before our eyes. A total leak. The Kremlin press service accidentally revealed Putin's real condition. The Federation's main secret collapsed due to the stupidity of its own PR people. On March 8th, the Russian president's administration messed up and posted an unedited video where Putin is out of breath from coughing and complains about his throat. But the funniest part is, for the first time in a year and a half, they forgot to delete the metadata. It turned out that the Kremlin's master was recorded 3 hours before publication. And while Lavrov is spinning fairy tales about the boss's heroic health, Israeli journalist Mark Kotliarsky, citing medical circles in Moscow, shared an interesting insight.
According to the same sources, Putin has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a malignant and aggressive tumor characterized by the uncontrolled growth of glandular and epithelial tissues in the organ's ducts. Moreover, most likely the disease is progressing to such an extent that even if surgery is performed, it will only prolong his life for a short time. According to the sources, we're talking about a maximum of 3 to 4 months. And
while the dictator is slowly dying, his approval ratings are already hitting historic lows. Even the hand-picked ones. The state-run polling center in Russia has been forced to acknowledge the catastrophe. Trust in Putin has plummeted to a miserable 32.1%. This is the absolute minimum since the start of the full-scale invasion. The approval rating of the United Russia Party has also dropped to 32%. In addition, the independent Levada Center is recording another record. Almost 70% of Russians are begging for peace talks with Ukraine. The people are completely exhausted by the war.
United Russia has also set an anti-record for the entire duration of the war. 6 months before the Duma elections, only 31.8% of Russians are ready to vote for the ruling party. In this case, the survey was closed, meaning respondents chose from the options provided. Already 2/3 of Russians, 67%, want peace negotiations with Ukraine. This is according to a Levada Center poll. The number of supporters for continuing the war, on the contrary, has dropped to 24%. The increase in demand for peace and the decrease in support for the war have been evident in Levada's polls since the fall of 2024. And now both categories have reached record levels.
Against the backdrop of political and physical collapse, a fierce power struggle has erupted among the security forces in the Kremlin. The noose around former Minister Shoigu has tightened completely. FSB investigators are rounding up his closest associates. Shoigu's right-hand man, former Deputy Minister Timur Ivanov, has already been sentenced to 13 years in a penal colony and fined 100 million rubles. Next behind bars was General Tsalikov, the main PR officer of the Ministry of Defense, who was charged with creating a criminal organization. 4 deputies are in custody, 5 have been dismissed, and 1 has died under mysterious circumstances. The army's leadership has been decapitated and demoralized. The looters are devouring each other while Ukrainian drones are burning down their oil depots. And now let's look at the international stage, where Putin's alliances have suffered a complete collapse. Moscow's fattest military partner, Iran, is currently being reduced to zero by the might of Israel and America. The main sponsor of Putin's terror, dictator Khamenei, has been successfully eliminated, and all of Tehran's defense infrastructure is engulfed in flames. As a result, Russia has lost its only major defense alliance in the Middle East. No more Shaheds and ballistic missiles, but Ukraine sees no downside in this.
In addition to Shaheds, which the Russians call Jairan, Iranian ballistic missiles supplied by Tehran to Moscow for a total of $3 billion, are systematically launched at our cities and towns. Now, Iran's military-industrial potential is being destroyed, and obviously there will be fewer opportunities to continue supplying Russia.
But the Iranian ruins are only part of a global collapse. Recently, right under the Kremlin's nose, American special forces brilliantly eliminated a Russian foothold in Latin America. Dictator Nicolas Maduro was captured in just 3 hours. And what about the much-vaunted Russian support for Venezuela? All the hyped-up S-300s and Panzers didn't even make a sound as they vanished. A US helicopter. Moscow poured an incredible $8 billion into this regime, dreaming of creating an anti-American outpost. But in the end, it received a powerful historical slap in the face.
Venezuela was important for Rosneft as it provided opportunities to make business deals that would replenish the Russian economy. Now the West has a chance to put more effective pressure on the Kremlin. The Kremlin's oil revenues have fallen by 25%. Difficulties in cooperating with Venezuela could also hit Russia's financial capabilities.
The consequences of this defeat are catastrophic for the Russian budget. Russian tankers carrying Venezuelan oil were immediately seized, along with the Kremlin's oil revenues, which had already dropped significantly, have now collapsed even further by a quarter. And how did Putin respond? What was Putin's answer? Once again, he swallowed his pride, limiting himself to pitiful diplomatic sighs. Russia has become so bogged down and depleted in Ukraine that it simply has no strength, resources, or courage left to enter into direct confrontation with the United States, because of its puppets. And of course, the grand failure in Syria. Dictator Bashar Assad, whom Putin showered with money and saved with his air force since 2015, shamefully fled to Russia, running away as fast as he could. Syrian rebels are toppling monuments to both dictators, drinking coffee in Assad's palaces, and confidently taking control of the entire country. Moscow once reduced Aleppo to dust and leased military bases for 49 years. But as soon as the entire Russian army got bogged down and started fertilizing the Ukrainian steppes, the Syrian project was instantly shut down.
These bases became critically important hubs for transferring military mercenaries to Africa, where Russia uses anti-Western sentiment to strengthen its influence. But it is unclear what the new Syrian government will be willing to allow. Russian diplomats are fleeing Damascus en masse, and Russia may now be unable to cope with the situation.
If the loss of Syria and Venezuela are painful blows, then the news from Beijing is a shot to the head for Putin's regime. The ground literally caught fire near Tizinpino. In China, a grand armed coup almost succeeded. Top generals tried to overthrow Xi, staging an actual shootout with his personal security right in a government hotel. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, with thousands of soldiers thrown into prisons. For the Kremlin, this is an absolute catastrophe. The much-vaunted Chinese stability collapsed abruptly. The throne beneath the elder brother has started to shake, which means Putin is finally losing his main global defense. The axis of evil is collapsing before our eyes, and there is no one left to save the Moscow dictator. Shoigu's generals are headed for the basement, and Zarkov is facing prison. The closest associate of the former minister turned out to be just a minor pawn in the giant chain of Kremlin generals who plundered their own army. All the shocking details of the total corruption among Putin's generals. Watch the full story.
The calm in the Russian Ministry of Defense did not last long. The investigation has reached Shoigu's closest associate, Ruslan Salikov. No one knows as much about the former minister and Putin's friend as he does. Salikov followed Kuzugetovich around like a Decembrist's wife.
No one was closer to Sergei Shoigu. I even think his mistress was less close to him than Salikov because they've known each other for over 30 years. Through every position, whether it was the governorship in the Moscow region or whether it was a post in the Ministry of Emergency Situations or the Ministry of Defense, he was always his closest and first deputy everywhere. So this is a super trusted guy, a person who, of course, is not a military man, not an emergency services officer, and not a politician at all. He was, but he held these important positions. And everywhere he was one of Sergei Kuzugetovich's main money men. And we see that now when he has already been taken down, Shoigu is left without his closest associates at liberty.
The only thing is, unlike John the Decembrist, Salikov never renounced his privileges, let alone his wealth. Of course, like any respectable Russian official with a modest salary, he registered everything in his children's names. And Ruslan Salikov has as many as 4 children. And investigators from Navalny's team claim that Dad managed to provide for all of them.
Through their company, Liza and Yulia Tsalikova bought a 264 square meter property in the Moscow business center Crosswall Kamovniki for 132 million rubles, and several office spaces at 24 Posledny Lane with a total value of 85 million rubles. The Tsalikov sons, Daniel and Zor, were even luckier. They own real estate using the same scheme as their sisters. Through their company, Dominus Z, the brothers bought 2 plots of land in the village of Krasnoye in Domodedovo. Although, to be fair, they have already managed to sell one of them. Each plot is almost 1,000 sotkas and cost 260 million rubles apiece.
The Tsalikovs also registered 5 premises at once to Dominus Zid, with a total area of over 1,000 square meters, a business center from sugar factory on Zemlyanoy Val. They are worth almost 400 million. They were buying up real estate quite recently, right during the war, and all of it is registered to the children. We found that the Deputy Minister of Defense owns property worth 1,100 million rubles. If you don't pay attention to your own children, then what did we have them for, excuse me? For the sake of, as the saying goes, giving birth?
At the Ministry of Defense, Tsalikov was in charge of propaganda, oversaw the Unamia Youth Army and the Patriot Park project. In addition, he was responsible for the personal PR of Sergei Shoigu and managed his finances. Tsalikov oversaw the Department of Financial Control, meaning he managed the ministry's enormous budget.
Ruslan Tsalikov is something like a Grand Vizier, House Manager, Treasurer, and Financial Director all rolled into one. He worked at the Ministry of Defense during a period that we know particularly well. He handled the most important assignments that came directly from Sergei Shoigu. If land needed to be distributed in some village to generals and deputy ministers, Ruslan Tsalikov was the one who handled it. If someone needed to go and negotiate sensitive issues, Ruslan Tsalikov was the one who did it. If the trillion-ruble budget allocated for construction for the Ministry of Defense needed to be divided up, without exaggeration, Ruslan Tsalikov was the one in charge. Only after him did Timur Ivanov handle these matters, who, I remind you, is in jail and will apparently remain there for the rest of his days, because they won't let him go to the war.
It was Timur Ivanov who, after being put in pre-trial detention, informed on his boss Tsalikov. And, as reported by the media, Tsalikov himself even showed up for a face-to-face confrontation. According to VCHK OGPU, they had planned to detain the general as early as last spring, but first Shoigu's protection intervened, and later Marat Kambolov, vice president of the Kurchatov Institute Research Center, stepped in. Thanks to this, the process was able to be put on hold. For this, Tsalikov paid $20 million. But the immunity didn't last long.
Several individuals involved in other corruption scandals gave testimony against Ruslan Tsalikov. All of them are pre-trial cooperators, people who made deals with the investigation and received the right to have their cases considered under a special procedure in court. At the very least, all the defendants in Timur Ivanov's case, about the purchase of ships circumventing sanctions and the embezzlement of funds from Intercommerce Bank. They testified that Tsalikov was behind everything. The charge of organizing a criminal organization may indicate that security forces intend to combine the cases, Ruslana Tsalikova, with the cases of 2 other former Shoigu deputies, Pavel Popov and Timur Ivanov, as well as other high-ranking officials of the Russian Ministry of Defense.
Already now, Russia's main propagandists are reporting that Tsalikov could end up behind bars for 20 years. Moreover, all his property could be confiscated in favor of the state. Ruslan Tsalikov is the last of the 4 associates of Sergei Shoigu with whom he came to the Russian Ministry of Defense. And now, in the highest offices of Moscow, they are searching for an answer to the question, will Shoigu's closest associate betray him? And what will Putin decide? Could he really forget their fishing trips together and the pine nuts in the taiga?
We are high above the clouds. Much higher than the clouds.
The leak of the century. Putin's general hates the FSB and lines his pockets with blood money. Journalists have uncovered secret correspondence from Demurchiev where he heaps the vilest insults on his own general staff and the Kadyrovites. How exactly this military man is raking in millions from the war while his fellow soldiers sit in the trenches. Watch the report for all the shocking insider information.
The official income of the Deputy Commander of the 20th Combined Arms Army of the West Group of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, Major General Roman Demurchiev. There's nothing questionable about it on the surface. As journalists from the Schemes and System Project have found out, he currently earns about 600,000 rubles. During the full-scale war, Demurchiev's income has increased significantly.
The base salary for such a position is actually quite small, around 35,000 rubles. However, the actual income is much higher. It consists of combat pay, bonuses for rank, years of service, and other allowances. He served as brigade commander for just over a month until early April 2022. Soon after, Demurchiev's salary increased several times over. In March 2023, the colonel received 662,000 rubles.
Judging by Demurchiev's wife's messages with a bank statement in 2022, his monthly income with all bonuses included was as follows. He earned about 300,000 rubles. But since the general dreamed of a large apartment in Moscow, he had to get creative. After all, prices in the capital are pretty steep.
Actually, I was counting on a maximum of 15 million. Now it's already 25. What's going on? I'm coming back from the war. At this rate, I'll never get out. At this pace, I'll have to fight for another 10 years just to make a living. And
this is where things start to get really interesting. Even if it's a bit cliché, Demirchev decided to make money off the soldiers. For 100,000, he promised to make a couple of calls and solve the issue of getting someone transferred from the front line.
A special person goes to our general and says that someone from a certain unit needs to be transferred to another. For example, he was a rifleman in some unit, and now he wants to become the company medic. In other words, to transfer to a slightly less combat-oriented position, let's put it that way. And all for a moderate fee of around 100,000 rubles. Timurchik would simply make a couple of calls to his friends and contacts he kept in touch with and somehow arrange for this order to be processed. It seemed like everyone benefited, and he made a little extra income. And
the income, by the standards of the Russian army, was really quite small. Bolder colleagues of Demirchev would ask for 15 times more for the same kind of transfer. Earlier, the Telegraph reported that Russian commanders were demanding $30,000 from soldiers so they would not be sent into the offensive.
This entire complex scheme of the ongoing war in Ukraine has unfortunately become a massive and consistent source of income for a very specific circle of influential people. And accordingly, these substantial incomes are deeply connected to various illicit financial schemes, including blatant speculation, such as when official payments are still being made to those soldiers who have already tragically died, but the actual money stays behind with the military command. And this continues on and so forth in many different ways.
Demirchev's schemes are yet another proof that corruption exists at absolutely every level of the Russian army. Moreover, Russian commanders make money in all sorts of ways. For example, they order their subordinates to fake combat injuries in order to receive payouts. Wounded heroes get medals, leave, and combat pay. The commanders get a cut of the payouts. Russian soldiers also make money through trade. Commandos sell their own soldiers into forced labor.
Agents of Atesh from the Motorized Rifle Regiment report cases where commanders have effectively sold their subordinate soldiers who refuse to participate in assaults. Instead of officially processing their refusal or sending them to disciplinary units, those who refuse are listed as missing in action. Those listed as missing are detained and handed over for unpaid labor in the rear to local collaborators throughout the Zaporizhzhia region.
And of course, there's also extortion and outright money grabbing, which also became known from an intercepted communication.
Soon you'll be gathering in groups of 40 already. What is this? Why aren't you outraged? I mean, about this, why aren't you saying anything? Are you serving or not serving, Pasha? It's not enough for me. I feel sorry. What are you giving? No one knows where this money is going.
Demirchev also recalls such forced voluntary contributions.
You're a grown boy now. You shouldn't say things like that, Demirchev warned. Organize a line. And every regimental commander does push-ups for things like this. And Fakuk, now it's Saladin's turn. If you want, I'll give him the task. Sergei Nikolaevich, 130 push-ups. For a regimental commander, 130,000 is Fakunol. All the regimental commanders understand everything and are all obedient.
Demirchev is, of course, still far from the scale of bribes taken by Russia's top military leadership. But apparently he decided that the quieter you are, the further you'll go. Yes, and the experience of his colleagues holds him back. Otherwise, he doesn't want to end up behind bars like Timur Ivanov, the former deputy and former Russian defense minister Sergei Shoigu's deputy, who was sentenced to 13 years for a bribe of 1 billion rubles.
Honestly, even I was surprised.
And Demirchev knows about his colleagues' experiences firsthand. His close friend and former commander, General Ivan Popov, was sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment. 130 million rubles on metal structures intended for building defensive fortifications at the front. They even questioned Demirchev about the medal and the money.
Bro, I was summoned to the military investigative department in Moscow regarding Popov's case. They asked if I had given him any money.
But is the case really about corruption? After all, right before the investigation, Popov had complained about heavy losses and a lack of supplies. That's why Demirchev even reached out to Kadyrov, hoping he could help free his friend. Well,
we played our trump card, but it didn't work out for him, for the Lord. He reached out to Kirienko, some Kirienko, or rather, who does he have? Kirienko, he says, spoke to Spartak himself and supported him. Yes, an excellent officer, but he said, It's a political issue. I can't do anything.
But let's get back to corruption in Russia.
Corruption is the backbone. It's the very axis of the entire Russian state. Therefore, naturally, if there's stealing everywhere, then they steal in the army too. And when the main funds are allocated specifically for the war, that's where it's easiest to steal. So, of course, the problem of corruption in the army is absolutely systemic, and it won't be solved as long as Putin remains in power. And naturally, this inseparable connection between Putin's desire to wage war endlessly and, accordingly, his closest circle's desire to wage war endlessly as well.
Since new Defense Minister Andrei Belousov's appointment, embezzlement cases have surged. But what drives them is not the desire to fight corruption, but to take control of it themselves. Putin is guided by the same principle.
I'm tired of watching on TV who stole, from whom, how they stole, and how much they stole. Honestly, it's just exhausting, really exhausting.
Right now, there are more opportunities to steal in the military sector than anywhere else.
All the defense ministers have stolen. And Shoigu, of course. And in fact, when Putin replaced Shoigu with Serdyukov, it wasn't an attempt to make the army transparent. No. It was simply about taking control of those financial flows that were being laundered. And nothing more than that. So, of course, there has always been theft in the army, but now the percentage, whatever it is, 20, 30, 50, or even 80%, is taken from a much larger base, which makes the scale of theft even greater.
The story of Demurchiev is just a small fragment of a larger scheme where the war has become a source of income for Russian generals. While the rank-and-file occupiers are fighting for the Z motherland, their commanders are battling for budgets, kickbacks, and square meters in Moscow.
Meanwhile, Beijing is squeezing Russian territories and refusing Putin's oil. The Celestial Empire is now openly kicking the Kremlin out of Central Asia and absorbing Russian regions that it has historically considered its own. And the final blow to the occupiers' economy will be the upcoming summit with Trump. The US is putting heavy pressure on Xi Jinping to permanently cut off the lifeline to the gas station and swap Russian oil for American. All the details are coming up next.
Russia and China are talking more and more about a friendship without borders. Moscow calls Beijing its main strategic partner. But now a new geopolitical game is beginning around this friendship called Russian oil.
And for Russian-Chinese relations, it can be said with confidence that at any time of year, it is spring. In
early April, Trump is preparing his visit to China, and it is there that the US is considering the possibility of asking Xi to reduce oil purchases from Russia, and instead to buy more American oil.
But it's impossible to imagine that the loss of, say, Russian oil volumes would maintain a normal situation in the global energy sector and the world economy.
Rather, a drop in oil volumes will lead to a decline in the Russian economy. But anyway, no matter how you look at it, China today is one of the major buyers of this very oil. And on top of that, Putin sells it to his friend at a good discount.
As for Putin, he simply has no other choice. If something really does happen in China and China suddenly stops buying, then the overall situation is likely to deteriorate significantly and become quite dire for him personally. Naturally, from a logical standpoint, there is absolutely no reason why China would want to turn down an offer like this. Simultaneously, we must also consider the broader implications of these developments as they unfold.
In the West, it is increasingly said that China has significant influence over the Russian economy, which means it can use this influence in politics as well.
But this war is fully supported by China. And China could call Vladimir Putin and end this war as soon as tomorrow by stopping the supply of dual-use technologies that they are selling.
Beijing is gradually expanding its economic presence even in regions that were previously considered Russia's sphere of influence, for example, in the countries of Central Asia. China is strengthening its influence in Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, it is preparing to build a nuclear power plant. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, it is seeking to take over the automotive markets. In Tajikistan, it is claiming a stake in the mining industry. China is investing in roads, railways, and infrastructure. Today, it is already the largest trading partner for many countries.
This process has been going on for a very, very long time. Chinese interests in Central Asia are present at different levels in different countries, but they have existed practically from the very beginning. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, China's influence there increased so much that it became visible to the naked eye. If before this was only noticeable to those who very closely and carefully studied these specific countries, of course, Russia's historical influence is still clearly felt today, but it steadily decreases with each and every passing year.
Since I already mentioned the friendship without borders, this is precisely about how China is strengthening its position even within Russia itself, especially in the Far East. And it seems that the Russians themselves are not particularly happy about this.
And the Chinese have long been saying, well, Baikal is ours. I say, that's right, soon they'll be saying, like, Crimea is ours. They're already using all our resources, gold, coal, oil, gas, everything. They're a global power, while we live in poverty.
Although the funniest thing is that it is Russia itself inviting Chinese companies, counting on investment and regional development.
Putin has brought a lot of old Soviet jokes to life. There was this old Soviet joke. The night on the Finnish-Chinese border passed quietly. Well, that's Putin for you. He's moving at an accelerated pace toward making that joke a reality. And undoubtedly, as of today, Russia is dependent on China in every respect.
Interestingly, there's already panic within Russia itself. Russian media are claiming that China intends to reclaim its territories. In
Chinese history textbooks often mention that almost all of Siberia, including western Siberia up to the Tomsk region, are temporarily lost Chinese lands.
And here, apparently, Xi has decided to play by the Kremlin's rules. After all, Putin also likes to tie everything to history.
Chinese companies. They are very active in the Siberian and Far Eastern regions. The Chinese are actively settling in these lands and taking the resources.
So, is the transfer of Russian territories to Beijing just a matter of time?
In my opinion, today it will depend solely on China's desire, because there are some territories, small, but still there are territories, that Russia has transferred to China legally, though it's unclear on what grounds, but they have been transferred. But of course, if we talk about larger territories like the Far East and Siberia, there the Chinese expansion is economic. In many places, it's simply total.
It seems that the policy of the Celestial Empire is quite simple. Everyone simply chooses what is more beneficial for them, and it doesn't matter whether someone is involved or not.
There. It certainly seems that Putin is either fully present or he is completely absent. And furthermore,
let Putin go on living in his rosy dreams about a reliable partner in the form of China. In reality, though, Beijing acts according to its own logic, taking resources, technology, and investments. But it never takes risks for... It is important to take the time to truly value and respect another person's unique hobbies, passions, and personal interests.